we're going to be checking out the world's deadliest amusement parks that were open at one point. So shout out to CX Productions for putting together this video, and subscribe and enjoy.
Between 1978 and 1997, there was a theme park like no other.
There's nothing in the world like action.
Action Park.
An infamous experiment that injured thousands, hospitalized hundreds, and killed half a dozen.
The most dangerous theme park of all
wow.
time. The owner was like, I'm not going to hassle the kids with a bunch of rules. I'm just going to leave safety up to them.
Eugene Mulvihill's Action Park was a
Great
hugely
idea.
popular and much loved New Jersey attraction, remembered fondly for its experimental and thrilling rides, but also for ending in...
Is that a looky-loop on a slide? Yo, I've never seen that before.
There's no support beams on it.
There's a reason why this is closed, right?
There's a reason why we're watching a video on it right now.
for ending in bankruptcy, scandal, and tragedy.
A lot of people got hurt over there. As you can see, it was like extreme sports. They nicknamed it Traction Park.
A slight alteration of its official slogan sums it up quite well. Action Park, where you're the center of the accident. In today's video, we're going to dive into the strange world of America's deadliest amusement park.
Why was this even allowed to be open? Like, I don't understand.
In the 80s, they had like no rules, bro.
Yeah, you can do what you want. This was America.
On the 26th of May 1978, businessman Eugene Mulvihill stood admiring a creation he hoped would transform his business forever. Gene, as he was known, owned a company called Great American Recreation, which crucially operated a ski resort in the Vernon Valley and Great Gorge skiing areas of Vernon Township, New Jersey. Gene really wanted to address an inevitable difficulty of running a ski resort business. During the summer off-season, when the snow has long disappeared, your resort turns into little more than a regular grass hill, and as the snow goes, so does a significant majority of your business. Ski resorts had for some time been experimenting with opening summer attractions to make the land bring in revenue during this off-season, and Gene wanted to do the same. Following the example of other resorts, in 1976 he installed a 2,700-foot alpine slide down one of the steeper trails, and by 1978 added 2 water slides and a go-kart track. The result was a collection of attractions that became known as Vernon Valley Summer Park.
Dude, I hate when I'm on these rides and there's someone slow in front of me. Okay, it ruins the whole experience because then I have to do the whole thing again.
Wait, I've never been on one.
Which would open that May. This made it one of the first water parks in America, and over the following 2 decades would grow to 75 separate rides under its rebranded
Dude,
name,
75
Action
rides!
Park. But as well as its massive size, Action Park was unique in one very particular way. As his son Andy Mulvihill put it, Gene didn't want to do the same old shit, where you just get strapped into something or it twirls around. He wanted to take the idea of skiing, which is exhilarating because you control the action, and transfer it into an amusement park. There's inherent risk in that, but that's what made it fun.
That park is huge. Are you serious? 75 water rides?
75 is really close to 60.
Which is really close to 70.
It's just weird. That's like right in between 2 numbers that I know.
This simple philosophy of putting the guest in control made the park hugely successful, but would also become its biggest controversy. Action Park's first ride was coincidentally one of its all-time most dangerous. The 2,700-foot sledding track was constructed out of a mixture of concrete, fiberglass, and asbestos. Patrons would slide down the winding track on a small sled using only a handbrake to slow their descent. Injuries were atrociously frequent as patrons were sent down without much prior warning of the high likelihood their sled could jump the tracks on tight corners if they failed to apply the required amount of braking or lean to distribute their weight properly. Owing to...
They're going quick, bro.
We could do this.
I think they changed the modern ones because there's no way they would let the modern ones you can fly off the track, right?
Well, that's part of the fun.
Poor maintenance practices, the sled's braking system would really only offer 2 settings, extremely slow, and a speed described by a former employee as death awaits. The result was patrons, usually wearing only bathing suits and most definitely without any helmets or protection, would regularly be thrown off their sled, suffering severe abrasions and broken limbs. Between 1984 and 1985, the slide alone was responsible for 14 fractures and 26 head injuries. In fact, that at the end of a busy day, staff would find certain sections of the slide coated in a reddish sheen of blood and shredded skin.
Every day, hundreds of toes abandon their feet.
Little piggies don't go to the market. They try to find a real home.
A home that cares.
Get socks and socks today.
To show your toes that you care.
Only at Socks, not Store.
Please, for the love of God!
Staff kept a magic potion of 70% alcohol and 10% iodine on hand to spray down severely carpet-burned patrons.
So they had it ready.
An employee was ejected at such a high velocity that the resulting injury gouged the back of his legs and butt so badly that he needed 200 stitches.
Hey, Socks, you were telling me this is perfectly safe.
I don't know how these guys are flicking themselves off. I mean,
I don't know. You don't know now. You don't know now.
no, it's just a skill issue. They need to get better. They don't know how to use these things, bro.
And finally, just to add insult to injury, because the Alpine slide traveled directly under the park's former ski lift, those riding would routinely get spat or urinated on from above. The slide was located at the Alpine Centre, one of the three main sections of Action Park, the other two being Motor World and Water World, which housed the vast majority of the park's rides.
That's huge. This was in the 1980s.
Some might say it's massive.
The nearby skateboard park was closed after only a single season due to inadequate build quality. The skating bowls were separated from each other by pavement, which in many cases did not match the height of the bowl edge, meaning boards would get stuck on the lip. A former employee commented it was responsible for so many injuries that we covered it up with dirt and pretended it never happened. And in fact, some of the rides were so dangerous they never even managed to open to the public at all. The Bailey Ball was such an attraction, essentially a large steel sphere with industrial roller wheels bolted all around the outside.
This looks like the bomb that they put in the water that floats.
Oh, I know what you mean. A submarine bomb.
Yeah, this literally looks like a submarine bomb.
Creating what can only be described as a replica World War II era anti-submarine mine.
That's what you said it is. That's what we said.
The idea was a human rider would be secured inside and rolled downhill on a PVC pipe track. However, when the state inspector arrived to see the ball in action, the summer heat had expanded the piping, causing the ball, with a man inside it, to fly off the tracks, rolling down the steep slope uncontrolled and traveling straight through the parking lot across Route 94 and finally coming to rest in a swamp. It said that the inspector watched silently as the ball came to a rest before promptly leaving without saying a word. Management abandoned this masterpiece.
They just throw this dancing clip when they describing this. Well, can we recreate this?
Can we recreate this?
Can we?
Who's we, bro? I am not getting that lawsuit.
You know how fun that would be, though?
You want us to be a hamster inside of a hamster wheel?
Yeah.
After the first season, in 1978, Gene sought to expand his park, believing the best way to do this was, quote, by legalizing drunk driving in a collection of attractions known as Motor World. The first ride of note here was the Grand Prix track, featuring 3/4 size Formula One races that could travel at over 50 miles per hour. If that wasn't concerning enough, the park operated an alcohol drinks bar only a few meters away. Patrons would ride these races drunk and often underage using a fake driver's license. One employee actually broke into the park in the middle of the night, stole a Lola Racer, and disabled its inbuilt speed limiter before taking it for a joyride down Route 94.
I'm gonna go, guys. Bro, I hear those keys jingling. Someone's already ready to go.
You guys will never guess what I just got.
What?
Oh my God, I'm gonna go do it.
You know what? I'm coming with you.
What?
Similar to the Lola races were the super go-karts. Drivers were not required to present a license here, which would not be so concerning were it not for the fact that the inbuilt speed limiter could be disabled by wedging in a tennis ball, enabling patrons to fly around at speeds reaching 50 miles an hour. A particularly unique injury that would occur here is that because the carts ran on petrol engines, the fume inhalations would regularly make patrons sick, and sometimes the gas caps would fly off the carts as people drove along, splashing out the liquid fuel and hitting drivers further behind in a kind of Mario Kart style attack.
So you telling me it's burning people when you're just driving past? Dude, this whole era was just testing out technologies.
Testing out the human limits, bro.
The super speedboats suffered a very similar issue. A tamer attraction nearby called bumper boats took the idea of hitting cars into each other and then put that on water. The problem was not with the bumper boats ride itself, more that patrons would treat the faster super speedboats as bumper boats, smashing the flimsy boats into each other at excessive speeds. Anyone too tall would have to dangle their legs over the side, and you can imagine just how regularly this caused lower extremity fractures.
Dude, this sounds so much fun, bro. Why was I on board back then, bro?
The engine fumes also coated the lake water in a kind of oily sheen, burning and irritating guests unlucky enough to fall into the water after a high-speed collision. Petrol-induced delirium was the reward for anyone who managed to stay inside the boat. And finally, another noteworthy attraction attraction for Motorworld, was one of the park's most popular attractions
That's
called
awesome.
Battle Action Tanks.
This is that Wii game. Oh my god, it's the Wii game.
We tanks.
Dude, you guys are all of a sudden the most reference-heavy people I've ever met in my life.
Featuring little mobile tanks that fired tennis balls from a cannon. If you shot another tank's hit point, it would temporarily disable movement, and static cannons placed
Dude,
on the
that's
arena's
sick,
perimeter
bro.
also allowed guests standing outside to fire in. This particular attraction was one of the staff's least favorite to guard because of the high likelihood of getting pelted with tennis balls that would fire at over 90 miles an hour while trying to perform maintenance in the area.
90.
But finally, the most loved and most infamous section of rides.
Those look like sewer pipes, like literally attached to the ground. Does not look like a water slide.
Were gathered into an area known as Waterworld. Undoubtedly the most dangerous, these were the rides that would ultimately lead to the tragic downfall of Action Park. Probably the single most recognizable of all these rides was the Cannonball Loop, a fully enclosed water slide with a unique, completely vertical loop at the end.
I have one question, right? Did the guy who ran this place, did he even try any of these like attractions?
He's just some demented idiot, bro. He doesn't care.
Tend not to see these at water parks for the perhaps unsurprising reason that shooting people out of a vertical loop is not necessarily conducive to their survival. The ride itself was built kind of by the eyeball, using some nearby car factory workers who had recently been made redundant as labor. When the first test dummies went down, it was reported that one came back missing its head. To convince real humans to go down, the park offered employees $100, and eventually Eugene's son Andy was the first person to do so, but in full hockey protective gear. This ride suffered from an inevitable problem of physics. If a human body was either too light or too heavy, they often wouldn't have the right momentum to safely clear the loop and would get stuck at the top, crashing down on either side. Nosebleeds and facial and back injuries were extremely common, so much so that the ride was only open for a single month before the state's advisory board forced it shut, considering it too dangerous. Some early riders were even coming back with lacerations to their body.
Even a month though.
Would have been a great month.
A whole month, and that was open for. That's insane.
This is crazy.
And when the ride was closed to determine what caused this, teeth that had been knocked out of previous riders' mouths were now lodged in the foam-lined interior walls, slicing open the next riders as they passed through.
You telling me the slide was so dangerous, it knocked out teeth, and then those teeth got lodged into the slide, so then the next victim went down and got sliced by the teeth.
Are teeth really that sharp though?
Apparently.
But the Cannonball Loop was by far from the only crazy installation. The Tarzan swing was a steel arch suspended from a cable over a spring-fed natural pool. Patrons waited in long lines for the chance to swing out and jump off into the water below.
That seems fine.
Because this spring was fed by mountain water, the temperature rarely exceeded 50 degrees, a fact most only came to appreciate as their bodies immediately went into hypothermic shock upon entering the water, where they would need immediate rescue after being unable to pull themselves back out. Another danger was if you held on for too long, you risked crashing into the concrete platform at the far side of the pool, something that broke many ankles and toes, but that's just a skill issue really. In fact, unsuspected danger was a prevalent theme of Waterworld.
Bro, why can't we do this, man? Oh my god, dude.
At the Aquascoot, patrons would skim across a shallow pool of water almost slightly deeper than a puddle in places, using a plastic sled in the same manner as skipping a stone over a lake. However, if you lean too far forward or back, the edge of the sled would bite into the water, catapulting the rider's head directly forward into the shallow puddle, resulting in serious injuries. Even if you avoided this, often the attendant would have already let the next rider down, slamming straight into the back of you. The collection of raft-based artifacts.
Wait, that's waist height. That's like 2 feet.
Yeah, that's not that bad.
Whitewater rides were also notoriously dangerous. Roaring Rapids was built to look like a natural river, complete with jagged rocks and sharp overhangs that fractured femurs, collarbones, and dislocated knees and shoulders. One of the courses featured a toilet bowl which flushed riders down into a dark tunnel. A tunnel lined with foam padding that would often tear away from the walls, narrowing the hole and causing human riders to clog the toilet. Attendants would then have to quickly turn off the water supply to stop those congested patrons from drowning. Surf Hill was another infamous attraction. Patrons would slide down a wet sloped surface on foam mats at high speed, landing in a very shallow puddle. The barriers between lanes were minimal and people frequently collided with each other on the way down or at the end. The 7th lane was known as the backbreaker due to a special bump midway intended to allow jumps and splashdowns into a larger puddle. It also had a reputation for causing serious injury, but both employees employees and spectators much loved this ride for one very particular quirk. You see, Surf Hill was especially good at separating women from their bikini tops.
Oh, these freaky guys.
Women would stand up at the end of the surf and, disorientated from hitting the plastic ridges at high speeds, wouldn't realize that they had emerged significantly less covered than they began the ride. A nearby snack bar was installed specifically to take advantage of this view.
I think that ride still exists. I think they just made it safer by putting handlebars like on top of the mat so you can't put your fingers around, you know?
I know exactly what you mean by tuning them.
However, a single ride stood out from all the others. A ride so deadly it quickly became known by employees as the Grave Pool. The tidal wave pool opened at the start of Action Park's 1981 season. The pool was 100 feet wide and 250 feet long and could hold 500 to 1,000 people at once. This was a seriously large and deep wave pool. The waves were generated by underwater machines for 20 minutes at a time with 10-minute breaks and could reach a whopping 1 meter high. The comparative calm of the water in break periods contrasted with the severity of those waves in a relatively deep pool that got deeper towards the machine end, meant that patrons would often get sucked much deeper into the pool than they intended, only realizing their mistake when they were in over their depth with nowhere to stand up. Because of the unrestricted entry, the water would often be covered in a dense packed layer of floating rings, which would keep people trapped underwater if they got swept down. The dangerous conditions would often cause people to crowd at the relatively few ladders to escape. 12 lifeguards were on duty permanently, and on high traffic weekends, as many as 30 people would need to be rescued from drowning. For comparison, a regular pool lifeguard will usually make 0 or a single rescue per year. In fact, when a consultant lifeguard arrived to make recommendations to improve safety, he was so overwhelmed by the severity of the conditions, he simply disappeared and never returned.
Can't be that bad.
Honestly, that's not even the scary part, though. The scary part is how many people peed in there besides me.
If it makes it warmer.
Okay, you see it.
And out of the hundreds of near drownings, on 3 separate occasions, the wave pool would prove to be fatal. In July of 1982, a 15-year-old boy named George Lopez would drown. 2 years later, 20-year-old Donald DePass, and finally...
He's still alive. What is he talking about?
In July 1987, 18-year-old Gregory Grandchamps. These were not the only deaths at Action Park. The first reported death was in 1980, when 19-year-old George Larson Jr. was riding the Alpine slide after hours. His cart jumped the tracks, and when ejected, George's head struck a rock. He died from his injuries 8 days later in hospital. Then on the 1st of August 1982, only 2 days after the drowning of George Lopez, 27-year-old Jeffrey Nathan was riding in an attraction we actually haven't covered yet, called the Kayak Experience.
How can the kayak be dangerous?
Someone's a little dramatic.
Which, despite sounding and being relatively tame compared to some of the other attractions, featured a hidden deadly secret lurking under the water. The Kayak Experience was an artificial whitewater kayak run powered by underwater fans that agitated the water to provide the current. Frequently, kayaks would tip over or get lodged among the concrete rocks, meaning patrons would have to step out of the kayak in order to right it again. When Jeffrey stepped out, his foot touched a grill covering one of those electrified fans. A 19 ampere current passed into his body and caused him to go into cardiac arrest. He later died in a nearby hospital.
They put a giant electric toaster that you could step on in the kayak zone. Are you... what?
Why would they do that?
And finally, sometime during 1984, a man died after suffering cardiac arrest, allegedly caused by the shock of cold water in the pool beneath the Tarzan swing. The water that day was believed to be around 50 degrees.
Oh, what? No, that's not cold, man. It's a little baby man.
So at this point, let's go a little deeper into how and why Action Park was so dangerous and how it managed to continue running for so long. Firstly, many of the staff attendants were teenagers and poorly, if at all, trained. Many were under the influence of alcohol while working, and training was never taken particularly seriously. The former security director, Jim Desai, got the job at age 21. They cared little for enforcing the rules, and considering the attitude of at least quite a few of the patrons, that's not entirely surprising. Sometimes physical altercations occurred between visitors or each other and staff. There was often physical disparity in favor of the patrons, and the teenage attendants didn't feel they had the power to discipline adult guests and would struggle to enforce the rules. This was definitely exacerbated by the availability and prevalence of alcohol on site. Beer was sold pretty much everywhere, and the drinking age rules were enforced in a particularly lax manner. The generally short distance between many of these kiosks and the rides involved involving operating motor vehicles with no safety equipment in a bathing suit really set people up for a rough time. It's fair to say that because Action Park was closer and slightly cheaper than the neighbouring Six Flags Great Adventure Park, many of the patrons were from lower income communities who had less opportunity to learn how to swim. And the fact that the park was advertised heavily to the Spanish and Polish communities nearby, even though that there were no translated instructions, did set the park up. Even though that there were no translated instructions, did set the park up for some trouble. There was a fundamental clash between how people viewed Action Park and what it intended itself to be. Gene's philosophy was that Action Park existed in a similar way a beach does. If someone swims out at a beach and drowns, it's a tragic accident, but there is more of a perceived onus on the swimmer for going out and making bad decisions and getting beyond their depth. Dying on a roller coaster, however, does feel somewhat different. You're kind of strapped and there's no skill involved in staying alive on a roller coaster. But it's been suggested that many of the patrons took that roller coaster attitude to Action Park and held not enough regard for their safety in the face of prevalent dangers because they never expected to need a level of control over the danger to stay safe. People just didn't realize that the wave pool was a genuine threat to life if used incorrectly, and the lifeguards regularly had to rescue people who jumped into the deep end without actually being able to swim. And again, turning to how the theme park ran for so many years with such a poor safety record, there are actually multiple interesting contributing factors. Because many of the rides were pioneering at the time, often built out of wild imagination as opposed to stringent engineering and testing, it was difficult for the regulatory authorities to control Action Park's rides. Especially in the early days, if a person survived a test run and nothing visually was falling apart, that was considered adequately safe. It's probably not a huge leap to also say that a special relationship existed between Action Park and the state, as the park was only ever fined once in its operating history. In fact, there's a humorous anecdote that when the local government complained about the high demand for ambulances generated by Action Park, Gene simply bought the local hospital a new fleet of vehicles.
That's insane.
That's aura.
Accident and injury reporting was often not done correctly or at all, and in cases where a claimant sought liability for injury, the park's legal attack dog attorney would viciously fight tooth and nail. In fact, it became difficult for victims to hire legal representation from the local lawyers purely because they all knew just how hard Action Park would fight every single claim through to trial. This was quite unusual for a business, but this is where we get to the downfall of Action Park. Action Park wasn't forced closed, it actually went bankrupt. GAR simply couldn't contend with paying for everyone who got injured there. As one litigant alleged in the early 1990s, there were over 2,400 active or past litigants who were seeking compensation against GAR. It turned out that the reason Action Park fought so hard to avoid paying was simply because they had no insurance. It's surprisingly expensive to insure for rides that have a tendency to maim and kill, so Gene came up with a pretty ingenious solution. He just set up his own fake insurance company called London and World and insured Action Park for nominal cost. He then did something really crafty and underwrote his fake insurance company with an actual real firm called Dover Insurance, saying to anyone who asked that they would cover any gaps in his own coverage. Dover and nobody else realized that this meant they'd be covering literally any payouts. It was a clever workaround that avoided Gene needing to pay
Dang, that's smart.
while still technically operating with some coverage. Not surprisingly, the government were not happy to find this out, but Gene did make the argument. He paid out of his own pocket whenever someone got injured. And by February 1996, the constant legal attacks culminated with the creditors who had taken on their $14 million debt petitioning the company to force it into bankruptcy. And a year later, in 1997, they announced the cessation of all operations. What followed was, in short, a changing of hands between multiple owners, modifications, closures, to produce a much tamer version of the original Action Park. Many of the ride's most dangerous attractions were either removed completely, buried, or made significantly tamer. The Action Park that ran for 2 decades was no more. A huge reason why Action Park continued for so long was simply because it was loved by a great many people. In fact, the park often made the argument that although a lot of people were injured and, well, killed sometimes, they did serve millions and millions of customers every year who had a great experience. Gene's fundamental ethos was to put people in control of their action, and this unique experiment created great memories for a lot of people. The bumps and injuries were often considered a source of pride and proof that you had survived Action Park. But thanks to woke, children these days...
That's a good statement. I feel like if you were a teenager and you would want to go to this place more because it had that dangerous enticement, you know?
But whose parents are letting them go to this?
Well, if you guys want to go to the theme park, you can't. It's closed. If you guys want to go to the theme park, make sure to hit that subscribe button, check out CX Productions, and check out another video right over here.